I had just turned off the lights and settled into my late husband's recliner when the doorbell rang 3 times. I opened the door to find my son, his wife, 2 sleeping grandchildren, and an SUV packed to the roof with luggage. "Mom," my son said without looking at me, "we're moving in for a while." Before I could answer, my daughter-in-law slipped a laminated sheet into my hands. "These are the house rules." I read the first line and realized they hadn't come asking for shelter. They had come to take my home. This story starts quietly, but it won't leave you unchanged. Right before we dive in, drop a quick comment. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family? Yes or no? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to read. Certain details have been adjusted for storytelling. The message, the lesson about boundaries, is what I hope stays with you. I was almost asleep when the doorbell rang. Not a polite sound, but 3 hard presses that said whoever stood on my porch had already decided their emergency was my responsibility. I looked at the clock. 9:47. At 68, I had been retired from teaching 3rd grade for 3 years, spending quiet evenings in the home Arthur and I had built together over 34 years. The lamp beside my chair threw a soft yellow circle over the living room. I had been sitting in Arthur's old recliner, the blue one with the worn armrest where his hand used to rest. He had been gone almost 4 years, but some evenings I still sat there because the house felt less empty that way. The bell rang again. "All right," I muttered, pushing myself up slower than I liked. My knees popped. My back gave me that sharp warning it had been giving me since I turned 60. I shuffled to the door. When I opened it, my 40-year-old son Brent stood under the porch light with 2 suitcases at his feet, looking more tired than I had ever seen him. Beside him stood his wife Marlene, 38, an HR manager wearing a cream-colored coat and holding a leather tote bag with the calm efficiency of someone executing a plan. "Mom," Brent said. Behind them, their SUV sat in my driveway with the rear hatch open. I could see more bags stacked inside, not overnight bags, but serious luggage. Boxes wedged between seats, the corner of a lamp. "Brent," I said slowly, "what's going on?" "We're moving in," he said. Not asking, telling. I blinked. My 11-year-old grandson Silas was asleep in the back seat, his face pressed against the window. Beside him, my 8-year-old granddaughter Ivy slept with her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. "For how long?" I asked. Brent rubbed the back of his neck. "Just for a little while. Lee's situation got messy." Marlene stepped forward. "It'll be easier if we just get settled tonight. We're exhausted." She said it like I had invited them. I looked at my son, waiting for him to explain, to apologize, to say anything that sounded like he remembered. This was still my house. He looked down and picked up one of the suitcases. That hurt more than the words. Still, he was my boy. 40 years old, with a wife and 2 children, but in my mind, still the kid who fell asleep after Little League games. And now, his own children were asleep in a car in my driveway at nearly 10 o'clock at night. I stepped aside. "Come on in," I said. Marlena smiled like I had passed a test. They rolled those suitcases over my threshold across the rug I had picked out at a flea market 20 years ago, straight into the hallway. Brent went back out for more bags. Marlena stood in my entryway, already surveying the space like she was measuring it. I helped carry the children. Brent got Silas into the guest bedroom. I took Ivy, lighter her rabbit, dangling as I laid her down, and pulled a quilt over her shoulders. I stood there, watching her sleep. When I came back out, Brent was bringing in the last bags. Marlene had disappeared into the guest room, unpacking something. In that moment, watching my son avoid my eyes while his wife moved through my home with the confidence of ownership, I understood something. He was not the boy I raised anymore. Somewhere along the way, he had become a man I had failed to protect from himself. Brent set down the final suitcase. "Thanks, Mom," he said quietly. "I know this is sudden." "It is," I said. "We won't be any trouble." Marlene came back into the hallway. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a sheet of paper. Not regular paper, stiff laminated. She handed it to me with both hands. "I made a basic house schedule," she said, "just so everyone knows expectations." At the top, in neat black letters, "House Rules." I read the first few lines. "Breakfast ready by 6 a.m., Bathrooms cleaned every night. Shirts pressed, dresses hung, not folded. No guests without prior approval. I looked up at Marlene, then at Brent. Brent was suddenly very interested in adjusting the nearest suitcase handle. The paper was laminated, professionally laminated, with clean edges and slick plastic coating. You don't laminate something on a whim. You don't laminate something in the car. How long does it take to laminate a piece of paper? A few minutes at an office supply store. How long does it take to plan the takeover of an old woman's home? Apparently, weeks. Marlena tapped the page with one manicured finger. Nothing unreasonable, she said. Structure helps everyone. I felt something rise in my chest. Not anger exactly, more like disbelief with a hard edge. "This is for my house?" I asked. She smiled. "For all of us." I looked past her into the kitchen where Arthur's recipe cards still sat by the stove. I looked at the refrigerator, covered in old family pictures. Brent, missing his front teeth. Me, holding him at Brown County State Park. Arthur, with black hair and a tool belt. Then I looked back at that laminated sheet, and I smiled. "Well," I said, "that's very organized." My son let out a breath he had been holding. His shoulders dropped. Relief washed over his face, and in that relief, I saw his guilt. I smiled at Marlene and said, "Thank you. This is very thoughtful of you." Brent's relief deepened. Marlene's smile widened. That was the last time I ever let them see how I actually felt. Because in that moment, holding that stiff, laminated sheet with its neat, printed rules for how to live in my own home, I made a decision. If they could plan in silence, so could I. By the third morning, I had learned to check the kitchen cabinets first, not for what was there, but for what had been moved. The coffee mugs were gone from their shelf beside the sink. I found them 2 cabinets over, wedged behind spare mixing bowls. My favorite mug, the ceramic one with faded blue flowers Arthur bought me at a Nashville craft fair, sat at the back, handle chipped. I filled it with coffee from the pot now brewing at 6 instead of 7:30. The kitchen smelled different. Not bad, just not mine. By day 4, the thermostat had been changed from 70 to 74 degrees. I turned it back. The next morning, it was 74 again. I stopped trying. By day 5, the Wi-Fi password had been reset. Brent looked embarrassed when he gave me the new one, but he did not apologize. On day 6, I found 3 cardboard boxes stacked outside my bedroom door, each with color-coded stickers, green for keep, yellow for donate, blue for old. Inside the top one were my cross-stitch samplers, my ceramic birds, the framed photo of Arthur and me at Yellowstone, all labeled blue. Old. Marlena came around the corner, carrying another box. "Oh, good, you found them," she said. "I'm just creating better flow. You understand." "What paperwork?" I asked. "What?" "You told the painters you'd schedule the actual work once the paperwork is finalized." "What paperwork?" Something flickered across her face. Then the smile returned. "Oh, just some administrative things. Don't worry about it." She shifted the box. "The important thing is making this space work for all of us." She walked into the living room where 2 men in paint-stained overalls were measuring the walls. I had not invited them. I had not even known they were coming. I stood invisible in my own kitchen while strangers measured my walls. By day 7, I had stopped correcting things. I drank coffee from whichever mug I could find. I wore a cardigan indoors even though it was June. I used my phone's data instead of Wi-Fi. I was learning to be a guest in my own home. Day 8, that Saturday morning, something inside me finally broke. I came into the kitchen just after dawn, and the counter was wrong. The spot where Arthur's bread maker had sat for 4 years was bare. Then I heard the clanging outside. I walked to the back door and looked through the glass. At the curb, Marlene stood beside the trash bin, shoving something inside something cream-colored and bulky. I recognized immediately. The bread maker. Arthur's Panasonic bread maker. Marlene said something to the waste worker. I could not hear through the glass, but I could read her lips. "Yeah, throw that old junk away, taking up counter space." The bread maker had been a gift for our 34th anniversary 3 months before the diagnosis. Arthur never got to taste the last loaf I baked in it. His appetite was already gone by then, stolen by the cancer that would take him 6 months later. But I kept baking anyway, every Saturday morning, because the smell of rising dough was the closest thing I had to him still being here. Now it was gone, and with it the warm, yeasty comfort of Saturday mornings when he had still been alive to see them. I stood at the back door, my hand pressed against the glass, something rising in my throat that might have been a scream or grief or both. Then I saw my neighbor Walter Mercer, 70 years old, with a retired investigator's sharp eyes, had lived next door for 22 years and noticed things other people missed. He stood at the property line, his phone pointed toward the trash bin, pointed toward Marlene. Our eyes met through the glass. He did not wave or smile. He just looked at me with sympathy and recognition. He lowered his phone and went inside. I stepped back, poured my coffee, sat down at the kitchen table with my face very still and calm. Marlena came back inside, brushing her hands together. "Oh, good, you're up. I cleared some counter space. That old bread maker was just collecting dust." I took a sip of coffee, set the mug down carefully. "I see that," I said. She waited, expecting more. When I said nothing, she shrugged and went to check on the children. I sat alone, staring at the empty corner where something precious used to be. That afternoon around 4, I heard a soft knock on the backyard fence. Walter stood there with 2 cans of root beer. I went outside. We sat in the old patio chairs Arthur had built from cedar planks. Walter handed me a root beer. We sat in silence for a while, 2 neighbors sharing a drink on a June afternoon. "I saw what happened this morning," he said, "and I took pictures." I looked at him. His face was weathered and kind, but his eyes were sharp. Investigator eyes. "Why?" I asked. "Because I've seen this before." He set his root beer down. "People don't steal a house overnight, Phyllis. They make you feel like a tenant in your own skin first. They move your things, change your routines, make you ask permission. Then one day, you wake up and realize you don't live there anymore. You're just visiting." The words hit me like cold water. "I worked property fraud cases for Hamilton County for 28 years, Walter continued. Elder fraud specifically. What your daughter-in-law is doing has a pattern to it. A plan. How long does it take to recognize a con? For some people, never. For Walter, about 3 days. The house is in an irrevocable trust," I said quietly. "Arthur set it up before he died. I can't sell it or transfer ownership. It's protected." Walter was quiet. Then he leaned forward, his voice urgent. "You need a lawyer, Phyllis. Not next week. Tomorrow." He pulled a small notepad from his pocket. "I know someone, Celeste Townsend. We worked an elder fraud case together about 12 years ago. She's good, she's tough, and she doesn't let people get pushed around." He tore off the page and handed it to me. I looked back at my house through the glass patio doors. Marlene stood inside the living room, holding a tape measure against the wall, her phone pressed to her ear, mouth moving rapidly. Planning something. Always planning. Walter handed me a slip of paper with a phone number written in careful block letters. I pulled out my phone and saved the contact. Celeste Townsend, attorney at law. Marlene's voice had been crisp that morning. "There are damp towels in our bedroom that need collecting." "Our bedroom," she had said, as if those 34 years of my marriage had been erased in 10 days. I had not called Celeste Townsend yet. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. But the truth was simpler. I was afraid of what a lawyer might confirm, afraid of what it would mean to fight my own son. But I climbed the stairs to the master bedroom anyway, because refusing would have given Marlene something to criticize at dinner. I stood in the doorway of the room Arthur and I had shared for 34 years. The walls were still the same soft cream color I had painted them in 2015. The window still faced east, catching morning light. But everything else was wrong. Marlene's clothes hung in the closet where my dresses used to be. Her perfume, something sharp and floral, had replaced the faint scent of Arthur's aftershave that had lingered for years. The damp towels sat on the floor beside the bed. I bent to pick them up, my knees protesting. Then I saw the paper on the desk. It was folded in quarters, tucked beneath a stack of unopened mail. I should have left it alone. Should have collected the towels and walked out. But something about the way it was hidden, not quite hidden, made me stop. I set the towels down and picked up the paper, unfolded it carefully. At the top in Marlena's precise handwriting, House Rules, Draft 1. I read the first line. Elderly occupant must vacate common areas by 9 p.m. My breath caught. No personal items displayed in shared spaces. All cooking must be approved 24 hours in advance. Elderly occupant will take meals separately to avoid disrupting family dinner time. No visitors without written approval submitted 48 hours prior. I kept reading. The list went on. 12 rules in total, each one harsher than the laminated version I had been given. Each one designed not to create structure, but to erase me. I stood there in the bedroom that used to be mine, holding that paper, and something cold settled in my chest. This was not kindness softened. This was control rationed. Marlene had shown me the gentler version first, the laminated sheet with its breakfast by 6 and pressed shirts requirements, because she knew if she had started with this, I would have thrown them out that first night. She had calculated exactly how much I would tolerate, how much I would accept before I started to resist. She had engineered a slow boil. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and photographed every word. The camera clicked softly in the quiet room. Crisp, clear, catching every single line. Then I folded the paper back exactly as I had found it, placed it beneath the mail, and picked up the towels. I walked downstairs with my face calm and my heart pounding. That evening at dinner, Brent cleared his throat. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk about sleeping arrangements." I looked up from my plate. Marlene sat across from me, her expression neutral. The children were already in bed. "The kids are having trouble sleeping," Brent continued. "Ivy's been waking up at night, and the guest room is too far from our bedroom. We were thinking," he paused, "maybe you could move up to the attic, just temporarily. The kids need a room closer to the bathroom." I set down my fork carefully. "Brent," I said, "this has been my bedroom for 34 years. He would not meet my eyes. "You don't really need all this space anymore," he said. His voice was flat, empty of warmth. Arthur and I had chosen the bedroom furniture together in 1989, carried the headboard up those stairs ourselves, laughing when we scraped the door frame. Now I was being sent to the attic like surplus inventory. I looked at Marlene. She said nothing, just sat there with a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I could have refused, could have stood my ground, but Ivy did wake at night sometimes, and the guest room was far from the master bedroom, and if moving to the attic meant my grandchildren slept better, that was the lie I told myself as I nodded. "All right," I said, "temporarily." Marlene's smile widened. The attic bedroom was cramped and hot, even with the window open. The ceiling sloped down on both sides, leaving only a narrow strip in the center where I could stand fully upright. The bed was a twin shoved against the wall. One small dresser, one lamp. I sat on the edge of the mattress that first night, surrounded by boxes of old Christmas decorations and Arthur's golf clubs I could not bring myself to donate, and understood that I had made a terrible mistake. What does it mean when your child tells you that you do not need space anymore? That your life has grown small enough to fit in a corner? I sat there in the heat, the lamp casting shadows on the sloped ceiling, and thought about the unedited house rules folded in quarters on Marlene's desk. Thought about the laminated version she had presented that first night. Thought about the boxes labeled old. Thought about the bread maker in the trash. Phase 1 had been moving in. Phase 2 had been moving me out, one room at a time. Then I heard Marlene's voice drifting up from the main floor. She was on the phone with someone, her tone bright and satisfied. Most of the words were muffled by distance and the attic floorboards, but 3 of them came through crystal clear. Phase 2 is done. I sat on the edge of the narrow attic bed, staring at the sloped ceiling 6 feet above my head, and realized this was not about needing a bedroom closer to the bathroom. The first time I heard my daughter-in-law tell my grandchildren, I was confused. I was standing in the hallway holding a plate of fresh-baked cookies no one would eat. I understood now what Phase 3 meant. If Phase 1 was moving in, and Phase 2 was moving me out, Phase 3 was making me disappear completely, starting with the people who loved me most. "Grandma already forgot she told us that," Marlene said to Silas in the kitchen. Her voice was light, casual, like she was commenting on the weather. "We shouldn't bother her too much. She gets confused easily." I stood frozen in the hallway, the plate warm in my hands. Silas looked up at his mother, then down at his homework. He was 11 years old, old enough to know when adults were lying, young enough to believe them anyway. The next day, I left chocolate chip cookies on the counter, the kind Silas used to sneak 3 of when he thought I was not looking. He walked past them without stopping, without even glancing over. 2 days later, I heard Marlene in the living room with Ivy. "Grandma's things are really old, sweetheart," she said, her tone full of gentle concern. "They might not be clean. Better not eat those." She was pointing at the cookies I had left on a plate that morning. Store-bought this time, still sealed in plastic until an hour ago. Nothing old about them, nothing unclean. But Ivy nodded solemnly and walked away. I watched from the attic landing as my granddaughter learned to distrust me. The worst moment came on a Thursday afternoon. Ivy was coming in from the backyard, her face flushed from playing. She saw me standing at the bottom of the stairs, and her whole face lit up. She started running toward me, arms already reaching for a hug. Then she froze. Mid-run, mid-smile, she stopped. Her eyes darted over her shoulder to where Marlene stood in the kitchen doorway, watching. Ivy looked at her mother, then back at me, then at her mother again. An 8-year-old child asking permission to love me. Marlena said nothing, just stood there, arms crossed, face expressionless. Ivy dropped her arms, turned, walked straight to her room without another glance in my direction. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, my hands empty, and understood something. You can take a woman's house, her bedroom, her dead husband's last gift, but when you teach a child to fear showing love to her grandmother, when you turn an 8-year-old's instinct to hug into something requiring permission, that is when you cross a line from which there is no return. That night I heard a soft sound outside my attic door. I opened it to find a tiny slip of paper on the floor. Notebook paper torn carefully along the spiral edge. The handwriting was shaky, the letters uneven, formed with what must have been a dull pencil. "Grandma, I still love your bread." I picked it up with trembling hands, sat on the edge of my narrow bed, and read those 6 words over and over until they blurred. Then I walked downstairs to the kitchen. My kitchen, still, even if Marlene had rearranged every cabinet and made a photocopy, front and back, crisp and clear. I folded the copy into my pocket and brought the original back upstairs, tucking it into the small Bible Arthur had given me on our wedding day. The next morning I heard Marlene's voice from Ivy's bedroom. "Ivy, come here, please." I was standing at the top of the attic stairs. I could see through the crack in the doorframe into the hallway below. Ivy came out of her room, small and uncertain. Marlene held up a notepad. I recognized it, the kind with the cartoon cats on the front that Ivy liked to draw in. "Did you write a note to Grandma?" Marlene asked. Her voice was terrifyingly calm, soft, almost sweet. Ivy nodded, her eyes on the floor. "We don't pass secret notes, sweetheart," Marlene said. "It's not polite." She tore a page from the notepad, the draft I realized, where Ivy must have practiced the letters before writing the final version. Marlene held it out to her daughter. "Tear it up," she said. "Show Mommy you understand." Ivy stood there, frozen. "Ivy," Marlene said, still calm, still soft. "Tear it up." I watched through the crack as my 8-year-old granddaughter took the paper with shaking hands. She looked down at her own words, in her own handwriting. Then she tore it in half. The sound an 8-year-old makes when she tears paper in silence is no sound at all. She tore it again, and again, until the pieces were too small to tear anymore. They drifted to the floor like snow. Marlena smiled. "Good girl. Now go get ready for school." Ivy walked past the scraps of paper on the floor and went into her room. She did not look up at the attic stairs, did not look for me. I stood absolutely still behind the door until Marlene went downstairs. Every instinct screamed to go to Ivy, to hold her, to tell her it was all right, that I understood, that I still loved her. But I did not move. Because I knew with the cold clarity of someone who had finally stopped hoping her son would protect her, that if I interfered, Marlene would find a way to punish Ivy where I could not see, would make it worse, would teach my granddaughter that loving me came with consequences. So I stayed silent, stayed still, and made a different choice. I kept the original note she had slipped under my door. She had written it with a dull pencil on a scrap of notebook paper, the letters shaky and uneven. "Grandma, I still love your bread. I had already photocopied it the night before, front and back, crisp and clear, before my daughter-in-law ever found that notepad. From that morning on, I stopped enduring and started documenting. The phone lit up at 6:47 in the morning. Not mine, but my son's, left carelessly on the kitchen island where the bread maker used to be. I had started documenting everything the morning after Ivy's note. Dates, times, exact words. The old red grading notebook I had used for tracking third-grade behavioral incidents now held a different kind of record. 3 pages already written in careful blue ink. But I was not prepared for what appeared on that screen. The notification banner glowed bright against the dark background. Payment overdue, $340,000, commercial real estate investment account. I did not touch the phone, did not pick it up. Just read the words from where I stood, tea steaming in my hand, morning light pouring through the window. $340,000. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. The pieces I'd been trying to fit together for 3 weeks suddenly clicked into place with terrible clarity. The sudden move-in, the packed SUV at 9:47 at night, the laminated house rules presented within an hour, the systematic takeover, the painters measuring walls for renovations once the paperwork is finalized. It was never about the school district. It was never about being closer to work or helping me in my old age or giving the grandchildren more space. They were drowning, and my $580,000 home was the only thing that floats. There is a specific kind of heartbreak that comes from understanding why your child is hurting you. It does not make the hurt disappear, but it makes you realize that desperation can turn even good people into strangers. I sat there for a long time watching the notification fade from the screen. Then I picked up my own phone and called Walter. "I found out why," I said when he answered. He listened without interrupting as I told him about the debt, about the notification, about the amount. "Phyllis," he said quietly when I finished, "when exactly are you meeting that lawyer?" "Monday," I said. 4 days from now. "Good," Walter said. "Do not cancel that appointment." The coffee shop was small and nondescript, tucked 3 blocks off Main Street in Carmel. Not the kind of place anyone would notice. Not the kind of place where you would expect to find an estate planning attorney meeting a client. Celeste Townsend, 52, an estate planning attorney with calm gray eyes and 20 years of experience, had helped me create the trust after Arthur passed. She was the one who had made sure the house was protected, that I would never lose my home even if I could not manage my own affairs someday. Now she sat across from me at a corner table, a legal pad open in front of her, listening. I told her everything. The doorbell at 9:47, the laminated house rules, the boxes labeled old, the bread maker in the trash, the attic bedroom, the unedited rules draft, Ivy's note, the debt notification. "The irrevocable trust holds the deed," Celeste said when I finished. Her voice was steady, professional. "You retain lifetime occupancy. No one can legally pressure you into a valid transfer. The house is protected." Something tight in my chest loosened slightly. "But," Celeste continued, "knowing the truth is not enough. We need to build an unassailable case. Document everything. Indiana is a one-party consent state, which means you can legally record conversations you are part of, photograph changes to your property, keep receipts, save every text message, every email." "I understand," I said. A third-grade teacher learns early bad behavior escalates when consequences are absent. I had spent 32 years watching 8-year-olds test boundaries. My daughter-in-law was running the same playbook, just with higher stakes. "Start today," Celeste said. "Create a timeline. Write down everything that has happened since they moved in. Dates, times, witnesses. The more detail, the better." I reached into my handbag. "Like this?" I asked. I pulled out the red notebook, the one I had used for years to track which students needed extra support, which behaviors were escalating, which interventions worked. The one that now held something else entirely. I opened it to the first page and slid it across the table. Celeste picked it up, started reading. Her professional expression shifted. Her eyebrows rose. She turned the page, then another. April 25th, 9:47 p.m. Brent and Marlene arrive unannounced with all belongings. Children asleep in car. No advance notice given. April 25th, 10:35 p.m. Marlena presents laminated house rules document. Rules include breakfast ready, 6 a.m. No guests without approval. Bathrooms cleaned nightly. April 28th, morning. Coffee mugs relocated from original cabinet to back of mixing bowl cabinet. April 29th. Thermostat changed from 70 to 74 degrees without consultation. April 30th. Wi-Fi password reset without notice. May 1st. Personal belongings boxed and labeled with color-coded stickers. Old, donate, keep. The entries continued. 3 full pages. Dated, timed, specific. Celeste looked up at me slowly. "You have been doing this already," she asked. I took a sip of my coffee, set the cup down carefully. "I taught school for 32 years, dear," I said. "I know exactly how to document bad behavior." Celeste closed the notebook carefully and looked at me across the small cafe table, her professional mask slipping for just a moment. "You are the most thoroughly prepared client I have encountered in 20 years of practice," she said quietly. I met her eyes. "I started the night they moved in," I said. "The moment I saw that laminated sheet, I knew this was not kindness. This was strategy. And strategy requires documentation." Celeste's mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile, but held a certain satisfaction. "Then we have everything we need to begin," she said. "Keep doing exactly what you are doing. Record, document, photograph. And Phyllis," she paused, "do not let them know you are fighting back. Let them think they are winning." I nodded. I had been letting them think that for 3 weeks already. Walter pointed to the hallway outlet with the precision of a man who had spent 28 years recognizing things that did not belong. "Those aren't charging anything," he said quietly. I had invited him in for coffee on a Tuesday morning when Marlene had taken the children to summer camp. The house was empty except for the 2 of us. He had been studying the hallway for less than 30 seconds when he stopped, tilted his head, and pointed. The USB wall charger looked identical to a dozen others throughout the house. White plastic, block 2 ports plugged directly into the outlet. Except this one had no cord attached, no phone charging, nothing. "I've seen these models before," Walter continued. "Hamilton County fraud case, 2019. Miniature cameras disguised as standard USB blocks. The pinhole lens is smaller than a pen tip." I stared at it. "There's another one in the kitchen," he said, "above the island." I walked into the kitchen. Sure enough, another white USB charger sat plugged into the outlet near the ceiling, positioned perfectly to capture the entire room. No cord, no device, just watching. Marlene had installed surveillance cameras in my house. I stood very still looking up at that tiny lens and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not surprise exactly, not anymore. Just confirmation. She did not trust me. Did not trust that I would stay compliant, stay quiet, stay defeated. She needed constant verification, needed to watch me every moment to make sure I was not fighting back. I walked back to the hallway and looked directly into the pinhole lens. Stared at it for one long, cold second. Then I turned to Walter. "Leave them," I said. "Leave them." Walter's eyebrows rose. "She wants to watch me," I said quietly. "Fine, let her watch exactly what I want her to see." Understanding dawned across Walter's face. "You're going to perform for them?" he asked. I smiled. "I taught 3rd grade for 32 years, Walter. I know how to play a part." 3rd graders perform for authority all the time. The trick is knowing which performance earns the gold star and which earns the documentation that sends them to the principal's office. From that day forward, whenever I was in range of those cameras, I moved slowly, heavily, like a woman 20 years older than I was. I shuffled instead of walking. I paused at the bottom of stairs like they were mountains. I let my shoulders sag. I looked defeated. And everywhere the cameras could not see, in the attic, in my car, at the coffee shop with Celeste, on the backyard patio with Walter, I documented everything. 2 weeks later, Marlene announced she was throwing me a birthday party. "Your 68th is a milestone," she said brightly over breakfast. "We want to make it special." I smiled warmly. "That's very thoughtful, dear." The cameras were watching. The party was lavish. The dining table was covered in a cream-colored cloth, fresh flowers arranged in crystal vases I had not seen in years. Marlena had invited her corporate colleagues, neighbors from down the street, people from her book club. 20 guests crowded into my living room and dining area, holding wine glasses and small plates of catered appetizers. I sat at the head of the table in the blue dress Marlene had picked out for me, smiling graciously as people I barely knew wished me happy birthday. Marlene moved through the room like a hostess in her own home, which I supposed was exactly how she saw it. Her phone sat on a small tripod on the kitchen counter, recording. She adjusted it periodically, making sure the angle captured the table, the decorations, my face. "We wanted to make sure Mom felt celebrated in her own home," she said to a woman I had never met, her voice warm and full of daughterly devotion. The woman smiled. "You're such a good daughter-in-law." Marlene beamed. I smiled from my seat at the table head and said nothing. What I did not tell anyone was that my own phone sat hidden inside the hollowed-out bottom of the large floral centerpiece, recording every word of ambient audio. Indiana is a one-party consent state. I was present. The recording was legal. Walter arrived halfway through the evening, bringing a small potted plant and a card. He shook Brent's hand, complimented Marlene on the decorations, and settled into a chair near the wall where he could observe everything. At one point, our eyes met across the room. He gave me the smallest nod. Approval. Recognition. What do you call it when someone records you to prove their virtue, while you record them to prove their crime? In teaching, we called it a teachable moment. The party lasted 3 hours. By the time the last guest left, Marlena was already uploading footage to her phone, editing clips together into a short video montage set to soft instrumental music. I watched from the kitchen as she typed the caption, celebrating the beautiful woman who opened her home to our family. #blessed, #family. She posted it at 9:47 that night. By 10:30, it had 312 likes. I sat in my attic bedroom, scrolling through the comments on my own phone. So beautiful. What a wonderful family. You're such an amazing daughter-in-law. Blessed beyond measure. 312 people believed her, believed the performance, believed that the decorated table and the warm smiles and the carefully positioned camera angles told the whole story. I downloaded the video file directly from her public profile, saved it to the folder on my computer labeled Evidence, July 2023. Because the same video that made Marlena look like a devoted daughter-in-law also showed something else, a woman who staged a public celebration specifically to be recorded and posted. A woman who performed generosity for an audience. A woman who needed 312 strangers to validate her virtue. The same smiles, the same carefully staged moments. But in my hands, they told a very different story. I closed my laptop and looked around the cramped attic room, at the sloped ceiling, at the narrow bed, at the boxes of Christmas decorations stacked against the wall. Then I opened my red notebook and added a new entry. June 14th, Marlena hosts public 68th birthday celebration. Extensive social media documentation posted with caption emphasizing that I opened my home to their family. Video recorded and saved as evidence of image management and public narrative construction. I set down my pen. Let her have her 312 likes. Let her believe her performance was working. I was just getting started. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon while I sat in the attic watching dust motes drift through the last slant of sunlight. Celeste's voice, tight with the kind of controlled urgency that meant she had found something that changed everything. "I found something," she said without preamble. Marlene downloaded an Indiana gift deed template 3 months before she ever knocked on your door. The metadata is irrefutable. I sat very still, my hand wrapped around the phone. 3 months? I repeated. 3 months, Celeste confirmed. Downloaded from a legal document platform on January 26th. The file timestamp is preserved in the metadata. She researched gift deeds, downloaded the template, and planned this entire operation before she ever set foot in your home. I looked down through the small attic window at the backyard below, at the patio where Arthur and I used to sit on summer evenings, at the fence line where Walter stood now trimming the hedge on his side. "This is no longer a messy family dispute," Phyllis Celeste continued. Her voice was steady, professional, but I could hear the edge beneath it. "This is premeditated elder financial exploitation under Indiana Code 35-46-1-12. With the documentation you've already provided and this metadata proving premeditation, we have an unassailable case. There is a specific moment in every investigation when the hunter realizes they have become the prey. Marlene just had not reached that moment yet, and by the time she did, it would be far too late. "How much more time do we need?" I asked. Celeste was quiet for a moment. "Just enough to file the paperwork properly, not enough for them to break anything else." "Good," I said. I hung up and sat in the silence of the attic room. The power had shifted. I was no longer the victim waiting for the next blow. I was the architect of what was coming, and my daughter-in-law had no idea the trap had already closed. Before I tell you what happened when my grandson discovered the truth, are you still with me? Comment A if you think Silas should confront his parents, or B if you think he should stay silent and add one short reason why. A quick note. What follows includes some recreated dialogue to convey the emotional weight of that moment, but the core truth remains. It was late on a Tuesday night, almost 2 weeks after Celeste's call, when Silas woke up thirsty. I heard him from the attic, the soft padding of feet on carpet, the creak of his bedroom door opening. I moved to the top of the attic stairs and looked down through the darkness. I could see his small silhouette in the hallway below, moving toward the kitchen. Then he stopped. He was standing outside his parents' bedroom door. The light was still on inside. I could see the glow beneath the doorframe. Marlene's voice rang out sharp and clear. "Once Grandma signs, this house is ours. Then we can liquidate the equity and fix everything." Silas stood frozen. I watched from the shadow of the attic staircase, my hand pressed against the wall. Every instinct screamed to call out to him, to pull him away, to protect him from hearing what no 11-year-old should hear about his grandmother. But I did not move, because some truths a child has to hear for himself. Some knowledge cannot be filtered through adult explanations or softened by careful words. Silas needed to know with his own ears what his mother was planning. He stood there for a long time, so long I almost thought he had fallen asleep standing up. Then he turned slowly and walked back to his room. The door closed softly behind him. I stood in the attic shadow until the light under the master bedroom door went dark. The next morning, Silas came into the kitchen while I was making coffee. He had been avoiding me for weeks, following his mother's unspoken rules keeping his distance. But that morning, he walked straight to the chair beside mine and sat down. "Grandma," he whispered, "can I have some of your bread today?" I looked at him. Really looked at him. His eyes were red. He had not slept. "Of course," I said softly. He nodded and sat there in silence while I poured him orange juice. From that day forward, I documented everything with even greater precision. 32 separate audio recordings captured legally under Indiana's one-party consent law. High-resolution photographs tracking every unauthorized change to the house. Receipts for all the contractor work Marlene had commissioned without my approval. Screenshots of every message in the family group text. 24/7 automated Ring doorbell footage showing who came and went. My old red lesson notebook now held 28 dense pages of records. Dates, times, exact quotes, witnesses. I had spent 32 years teaching children that actions have consequences, that planning matters, that documentation protects truth. Now I was teaching the same lesson to a 38-year-old woman who thought she could erase me one room at a time. Celeste received everything via encrypted email. Her responses were brief and professional. Evidence Package 3 received. File structure, excellent. You're building an airtight case. The deep irony was this: Marlena's hidden cameras were still logging a defeated old woman shuffling through the house, moving slowly, accepting her fate, while my archive recorded every single crime being committed. She was documenting her own liability. One evening in early July, Marlene sat across from me at the kitchen table. The children were in bed. Brent was working late. Just the two of us. Her voice was dripping with the sweetest tone she had used since marching into my home 10 weeks earlier. "Mom," she said, "the 4th of July is coming up. I'm thinking of throwing a massive backyard barbecue. Let's invite everyone, the neighbors, my work executives, the kids' friends from school." She smiled at me, warm, inviting. completely unaware. "We can make it really special," she continued. "A celebration. A way to bring the whole community together." I looked her dead in the eye and smiled back. "That sounds wonderful," I said softly. "Let me help you prepare." Marlene's smile widened. Relief washed across her face. "Perfect," she said. "I was hoping you'd say that." She had no idea she was planning her own exposure. 1 week before the 4th of July, my daughter-in-law invited 3 colleagues from her office to tour the house she did not own, but spoke about as if the deed were already locked in her safe. I was in the kitchen when they arrived, washing dishes from breakfast. Marlene swept through the front door with 3 women in business casual, their voices bright and interested. "Let me show you what we've done with the place," Marlene said, her tone full of pride. I kept washing dishes, kept my face calm, kept performing the role the cameras expected. "We're redoing the kitchen completely," Marlene said, gesturing at the cabinets Arthur had installed in 1992. "This wall is coming down next month. We're finally making this space work for us." The women made appreciative sounds. Marlene led them into the living room. I could hear every word from where I stood at the sink. "It's been such a journey," she continued, "but this house will finally belong to us right after the 4th. I set down the dish I was holding very carefully. My own Ring doorbell by the front entrance had captured every syllable. The kitchen camera I'd quietly installed after finding Marlene's had recorded it all. Automatic, legal, mine. Arrogance I had learned over 32 years of teaching always provides its own evidence. That night, I forwarded the audio file to Celeste. She listened once and sent back a single text. "Next Friday. We have everything we need. Stop collecting." I sat in my attic room and looked at that message for a long time. 10 weeks of documentation, 32 audio files, hundreds of photographs, 28 pages of handwritten records, the gift deed metadata from 3 months before they arrived. And now this, my daughter-in-law announcing ownership of a house protected by an irrevocable trust on camera to witnesses. I put the phone down and closed my eyes. It was almost over. 2 days before the 4th of July, Marlene sent Ivy to the garage to sort boxes for a garage sale. I was upstairs in the attic when I heard Marlene's voice drift up from below. "Just put anything old or broken in the sale pile, sweetheart. These old rings can go straight into the garage sale box. Nobody wears gold that thin anymore." I went very still. The rings Arthur and I had exchanged. The ones we had worn for 34 years. The ones I had taken off only after he died, because my fingers had swollen with grief and age, and I could not bear to cut them off. Marlene was throwing them into a garage sale. I started to move toward the stairs, started to go down there and stop her. Then I heard small footsteps on the attic stairs. I turned. Ivy stood in the doorway. She was holding something in her small fist. She walked across the room without saying a word, placed something on my pillow, and turned to leave. "Ivy," I whispered. She looked back at me. Her eyes were red. She had been crying. Then she went back downstairs. I walked to the bed and looked down at what she had left. The engagement ring. The delicate gold band Arthur had given me in 1989 when we were both 34 years old and stupid with hope. The one I had worn through pregnancy and childbirth and 34 years of marriage. The one he had held in his fingers on the day of his diagnosis, turning it slowly, memorizing the shape of it. I picked up the ring, the one Arthur had slipped on my finger 34 years ago. The one I had worn through 34 years of marriage. The one my 8-year-old granddaughter had just saved from a garage sale. And I wept. Not from sadness, but from the fierce realization that love, real love, does not ask permission to protect what matters. I slid the ring onto my finger. And for the first time since they forced their way into my home, I slept straight through the night. The morning of July 4th dawned bright and clear. I woke at 6 to the sound of voices in the backyard. Marlena was already out there, directing caterers, setting up tables, planting small American flags along the edge of the lawn. My phone rang at 7. "The anti-coercion clauses are locked with the Hamilton County Recorder," Celeste said without preamble. "Any attempt to force your signature triggers immediate prosecution under IC 35-46-112. I stood at the small attic window looking down at the backyard below. "Thank you," I said quietly. "Phyllis," Celeste said. Her voice was steady, professional, but I could hear the edge beneath it. "Are you ready for this?" I watched Marlene below, phone pressed to her ear, pacing the patio. "Just make sure you arrive right after lunch," Marlene was saying to someone. Her voice drifted up clearly through the open window. "I want you here to witness the signature." Her attorney. She had called her attorney to come witness me signing away my home. "Yes," I told Celeste. "I'm ready." I hung up and looked at myself in the small mirror above the attic dresser. I put on the light blue dress my husband always said looked best on me, the one I had worn to his sister's wedding in 1987, the one he said made my eyes look like the sky. I adjusted the wedding ring on my finger, the one Ivy had placed on my pillow 2 nights before, the one that had survived 34 years and a garage sale and a granddaughter's quiet act of love. I looked at myself in the small attic mirror and saw not a defeated elderly woman shuffling through the last days of her independence, but a retired teacher who had just finished documenting the most important lesson plan of her life. I had taught 3rd grade for 32 years. I knew how to build a case. I knew how to document bad behavior. I knew how to wait for exactly the right moment to present evidence. And I knew that the best lessons were the ones students never saw coming. I walked down the stairs. The backyard was already filling with guests. By 2:00 in the afternoon, my backyard was packed with exactly the crowd my daughter-in-law had invited to witness what she believed would be my surrender. American flags lined the fence. Catering tables sat heavy with food. Marlene's corporate colleagues clustered near the patio, wine glasses in hand. Neighbors I barely knew filled the lawn chairs. Children ran through the sprinkler. The air smelled like grilled meat and sunscreen and fresh-cut grass. Walter stood quietly near the back fence, a can of soda in his hand, watching everything. Celeste was somewhere in the crowd. I had seen her arrive 20 minutes earlier, blending in like any other guest. Marlene moved through the gathering like a hostess in her own home, refilling drinks, laughing at jokes, touching people's arms with familiar ease. She was waiting for the perfect moment. It came at 2:15, when the backyard had reached its fullest, when every conversation was flowing, when everyone was relaxed and comfortable. Marlene stepped onto the patio and raised her voice just loud enough to carry. "Can I have everyone's attention for just a moment?" The conversations quieted. Faces turned toward her. She smiled warmly. "I just want to take a second to thank all of you for being here today. This house," she gestured around her, "has always been about family, and today feels like the perfect milestone to make that official." She turned to me. "Mom," she said, pulling a folder from the patio table, "we thought today would be the perfect family milestone to handle the paperwork, just to make everything official for the future." She opened the folder. Inside were printed documents, gift deed forms neatly filled out with signature lines highlighted in yellow. She extended a pen toward me. The backyard was completely silent. I stood up slowly. "Before I sign a single thing," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the lawn, "I think every guest here should understand exactly what they are being asked to witness." Marlene's smile flickered. "This house is held in an irrevocable trust," I continued. "My late husband Arthur established it before he passed away. I retain lifetime occupancy. The deed cannot be transferred. It cannot be signed away. Not by me, not by anyone." I pulled my phone from my pocket. 10 weeks ago, my son and his family arrived at my door at 9:47 at night and informed me they were moving in. Within an hour, I was presented with this. I held up a photo on my screen. The laminated house rules photographed in clear detail. "House rules," I said, dictating when I could cook, when I could have guests, when I needed to clean. Rules for living in my own home. Marlene opened her mouth. "Mom, that was just to help with..." "These," I continued, holding up another photo, "are surveillance cameras, hidden in USB wall chargers, installed in my hallway and kitchen to monitor my movements without my knowledge or consent." Gregory Halstead, Marlene's corporate attorney in his mid-40s, stood near the patio, holding a leather portfolio with the confidence of someone who had never lost an argument. He stepped forward. "Mrs. Caldwell, surely you can't expect us to believe..." Celeste moved out of the crowd. "The trust documents are recorded with Hamilton County," she said calmly. "Any attempt to coerce a signature triggers criminal prosecution under Indiana Code 35-46-1-12. Gregory went very quiet. I held up my phone again. This is an audio recording from 1 week ago, my daughter-in-law speaking to colleagues in this house. I pressed play. Marlena's voice came through clearly. This house will finally belong to us right after the 4th. What does it take to unmask cruelty in front of a crowd? Not anger, not accusations, just the truth spoken clearly with evidence that cannot be denied. I held up one more photo. This is my late husband's bread maker, a gift for our 34th anniversary. I found it in the trash on the 8th day after they moved in, thrown away without my permission. The backyard was absolutely silent. Marlene stood frozen on the patio, the gift deed still in her hand, the pen extended toward empty air. Not a single guest spoke. Her corporate colleagues looked down at their drinks. Her book club friends shifted uncomfortably. The neighbors studied the grass. Then I heard footsteps. Silas walked out from the side yard, 11 years old, holding a plate of untouched food. He stopped in the middle of the lawn and looked at his father. "Dad," he said. His voice was small, clear. "Is it true? Did you know about this?" Brent stood near the grill, spatula still in his hand. The silence stretched. Then my son, my 40-year-old son, who had arrived at my door 10 weeks ago with suitcases and a laminated sheet of rules, buried his face in his hands. "Yes," he said. His voice broke. "I knew, Mom. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." The sound of a 40-year-old man breaking in front of his mother is the sound of every excuse crumbling at once. Marlena opened her mouth, but no words came out. Not a single guest defended her. Her colleagues deliberately turned their backs. The neighbors gathered their children and started moving toward the side gate. One by one, the backyard began to empty. I stood on the patio and watched them go. When the last car had pulled away, when only Walter and Celeste remained standing quietly near the fence, I looked across the lawn. Silas and Ivy stood together in the corner. Ivy's small hand was wrapped around her older brother's. They had witnessed everything: the truth, the evidence, their father's confession, their mother's silence. They had seen what I needed them to see, that love does not manipulate, that family does not control, that home is not something you take, it is something you protect. I turned back to Brent and Marlene. 7 days, I said quietly. That is all the time I am giving you. Marlena's face went white. Brent nodded slowly, his shoulders shaking. I walked past them, past the abandoned catering tables and the small American flags planted along the fence, and went back into my house. The backyard stayed silent long after I closed the door. The rental truck arrived at 7 in the morning on July 5th, earlier than I expected, which told me my son had not slept. I watched from the attic window as Brent climbed out of the cab, shoulders hunched, moving like a man 20 years older than he was. Marlene emerged from the passenger side, her face blank, her movements mechanical. They had 7 days. They used 6. Brent did all the heavy lifting himself. Box after box, furniture piece after furniture piece. He carried everything down the stairs and loaded it into the truck without complaint, without asking for help, without making excuses. Marlene packed in silence. I would pass her in the hallway, and she would look straight through me, her jaw set, her hands moving efficiently through drawers and closets. They spoke to each other only when necessary, short, clipped sentences about logistics, nothing more. On the morning of July 11th, the truck was fully loaded. The house was empty of everything they had brought. Brent stood in the kitchen doorway looking around one last time. His eyes settled on the empty spot on the counter, the corner by the window where Arthur's bread maker had sat for 4 years before Marlene threw it away. He walked over to that spot, placed his hand flat on the bare counter, stood there for a long moment. Then he turned to me. "I'll replace it, Mom," he said. His voice cracked. "I don't know how yet, but I will make this right. There are 1,000 ways to say I forgive you, and 1,000 ways to say I don't." A single nod sits somewhere in between. It says, "I hear you, I see your remorse, and I will decide later whether that is enough." I gave him that nod, nothing more. He looked at me for another moment, then walked out to the truck. The only thing they left behind was the cheap Wayfair sectional sofa they had bought to replace my original furniture. It sat in the living room, too large for their new apartment, too cheap to bother moving. I called Walter. Together we hauled it out to the garage. Some people deserve second chances, Walter said as we set it down. Some furniture doesn't. I called a charity that afternoon. They picked it up the next day. That evening, after the truck had pulled away, after the sound of the engine had faded down the street, I walked slowly through every room of my house. I started in the kitchen, hung the family photographs back on the refrigerator door, Brent missing his front teeth, Arthur with black hair and a tool belt, me holding my son at Brown County State Park. I took down the laminated house rules sheet that had been stuck to the fridge with a magnet for 10 weeks. I tore it into pieces, slowly, methodically, made sure every piece was small enough that it could never be put back together. The scraps fell into the kitchen trash like confetti. I placed Arthur's tin of handwritten recipe cards back in the corner spot beside the stove where they had always lived. His handwriting on faded index cards, measurements for chili, instructions for cornbread, notes about letting the dough rest. I walked into the living room and retrieved my original armchair from the basement where it had been stored, the blue one Arthur used to sit in. I carried it upstairs and placed it exactly where it had always been. I turned off the lights in each room one by one. Kitchen, living room, hallway, master bedroom. The house had been mine for 34 years. Now it was mine again. I sat down in Arthur's chair and looked around the quiet room. For the first time since they arrived, the silence did not feel like absence. It felt like peace. The following week, I met Celeste at her law office. She had a thick manila folder on her desk. Inside was everything: the documentation, the photographs, the audio recordings, the metadata from the gift deed download, the testimony from Walter, the covert surveillance devices Marlene had installed without consent, the legal analysis under Indiana Code 3546-112. The file has been handed to the Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office, Celeste said. Elder financial exploitation. If pursued, it's a level 6 felony. The prosecutor will weigh your input heavily before deciding. I sat back in my chair. What happens to the children, I asked quietly, if both of their parents are processed through the penal system? Celeste went very quiet. Teaching children for 32 years taught me this: punishment without purpose creates bitterness. Discipline with boundaries creates growth. The difference is knowing when to hold the line and when to leave the door open. I set my jaw and looked at Celeste. Keep the record active on file, I said. Give them the chance to change their lives and make things right first. But keep the file open. Celeste made a note. Then she looked up at me, her professional mask slipping slightly. In 20 years managing asset fraud, she said quietly, I have never seen anyone handle an execution as cleanly as you did. I smiled gently. I taught primary school for 32 years, Celeste. I know the exact difference between discipline and senseless punishment. She closed the folder and slid it into her filing cabinet. Active, open, waiting. I left her office and sat in the parking lot for a long time, my hands resting on the steering wheel. Then my phone buzzed in my lap. A text message from an unknown number lit up the screen. Grandma, it's Silas. Mom took our phones away, but I borrowed one from a classmate. Are you okay? I stared at those 4 words. Are you okay? An 11-year-old boy who had watched his father confess in front of a crowd, who had heard every piece of evidence presented on a July afternoon, who had lost his home and his routine and his certainty about who his parents were. That boy was asking if I was okay. I felt something shift inside my chest, something that had been locked tight for 10 weeks. I typed back, I am okay, sweetheart. Are you? The reply came quickly. I miss you. I sat in that parking lot and cried for the second time since they had arrived at my door. But this time, the tears were not from grief. They were from hope. It took me 3 weeks to find it on eBay, the exact same Panasonic bread maker Arthur had bought me 35 years ago, in the same cream beige finish, worn at the handle, in the same familiar way. 3 weeks of searching through listings, clicking past the wrong models and wrong colors, until one Tuesday evening in late November, the right one appeared, and I knew it immediately, the way you know an old friend's face in a crowd. I'd been texting with Silas through the autumn. Brief messages sent from borrowed phones or school computers, never long conversations. Just enough to let him know I was still here. that the door remained open, that he did not have to choose between loving his grandmother and keeping peace at home. Patience is not the same as surrender. I was not waiting quietly because I had given up. I was waiting because I understood that some relationships need room to breathe before they can fully return to themselves. But text messages are fragile things. They disappear. Phones break or get taken away. I wanted something more permanent, something that could not be deleted or confiscated. I wanted bread. The listing appeared that Tuesday in late November. A woman in Michigan was selling her mother's estate. The bread maker looked exactly like mine. Same cream beige color, same compact body, same vintage, wear around the handle where years of hands had gripped and lifted and set it down again. I bought it without hesitating. It arrived 3 weeks later, carefully wrapped in bubble wrap and packing paper, as if the woman in Michigan had understood she was shipping something that mattered. I set it exactly where it used to live, right corner of the counter, where the afternoon light came through the kitchen window, just right. Arthur would have approved. Some things lost to cruelty can be restored. Not replaced, not forgotten, but restored with patience and deliberate care to the place they were always meant to occupy. I made the first loaf on a Saturday afternoon in December. The recipe was the same one I had used for 40 years, Arthur's mother's recipe, written in careful cursive on an index card, yellowed at the edges with age. Flour, yeast, salt, honey, butter. The bread maker hummed to life the way I remembered that low and steady mechanical rhythm that had been the soundtrack to so many Saturday mornings in this house. An hour and a half later, the kitchen timer beeped. I pulled the pan from the machine and turned the loaf onto the cutting board. The crust was golden brown, the top rounded and perfect. Steam rose in soft curls, carrying with it the smell of toasted yeast and melted butter. Warm, ancient, deeply comforting in a way that has no precise name. The smell of fresh bread does not simply fill a kitchen. It fills the hollow places that grief leaves behind, one warm slice at a time. I sat at the kitchen island with a cup of coffee and looked around the room. My kitchen, my house. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. Then I heard a soft, rhythmic knock at the back door. Not the front door, the back door. The one that opened onto the patio where Arthur and I had spent so many summer evenings, sitting side by side, watching the light go slowly out of the sky, and saying very little, because most things had already been said over the decades. I walked over and looked through the glass. Silas and Ivy stood on the porch, their bicycles leaned against the fence. Both children were breathing hard, cheeks flushed red from the December cold, their breath making small clouds in the frozen air. I opened the door. "Hi, Grandma," Silas said. He was taller than I remembered, growing fast the way 11-year-old boys do, as if the world cannot quite contain them quickly enough. Ivy smiled up at me, her hands shoved deep into her coat pockets, her small nose pink from the cold. "How did you get here?" I asked. Silas gestured toward the bicycles. "We rode. It's 4 miles. 4 miles, I repeated. In December. Dad said it was okay, he added quietly. Mom doesn't know we rode out here. But Dad said it was okay. I looked at my grandson standing in the December cold. I noticed the way he stood a little straighter when he mentioned his father. I heard the quiet hope in his voice when he repeated those words. Dad said it was okay. Brent was taking steps, small ones, uncertain ones, but steps nonetheless. Some fractures in families heal the way bones do, slowly beneath the surface, quietly becoming stronger at the point of the break, if only given enough time and space. "Come in," I said, opening the screen door wide. "It is absolutely freezing out there." They came inside and shed their coats and hats. Ivy's nose was bright red. Silas's hair stuck up in every direction from his winter hat, and he did not seem the slightest bit bothered. "It smells like bread," Ivy said the moment she stepped into the kitchen, her eyes going wide with genuine wonder. "I just made a loaf," I said. "Would you like some?" They nodded without hesitation. We sat at the kitchen island, the same island where Marlene had once stood with her laminated rules. The same counter where the bread maker had been thrown away without ceremony. The same space that had been stripped from me and then reclaimed inch by careful inch. I cut thick slices of warm bread and spread butter across each one. The butter melted immediately, pooling into the soft interior in golden, glistening streams. Then Ivy reached into her coat pocket and placed something gently on the counter between us. My wedding ring, the one she had saved from the garage sale. The one she had carried home and placed on my pillow that night in July without explanation and without asking for anything in return. I gave it back to you in the attic, I know, she said softly. But I wanted to come back and see where it actually lives. On your hand. I held out my hand. The ring settled onto my finger the way it always had, catching the pale winter light the same way it had caught the light for 34 years. Ivy reached out and touched it gently with one small finger, as carefully as if it might dissolve. It's pretty, she said. It is, I agreed. We sat together for a long time, the three of us, eating warm bread and speaking very few words, because some things do not require explanation, and some silences are not empty at all. Silas told me about his math teacher who let him work ahead about the science fair project he was already planning. Ivy told me about her art class, about a drawing she had made of a house with a garden, and about how she had painted a grandmother standing on the front porch looking out. Can we come back? Silas asked, when the bread was gone and the afternoon light had begun to fade. Anytime, I said. The door is always open. He smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes and stayed there. I walked them out to their bicycles as the winter sun settled low behind the bare trees. I checked that their coats were zipped. I made sure they both had lights on their bikes for the ride home through the early dark. Then I stood at the end of the driveway and watched them pedal away, their small figures growing smaller against the pale December sky, until they turned the corner and disappeared. I went back inside and closed the door behind me. I sat at the kitchen island, my kitchen island, in my kitchen, in my house, and looked around the room that was fully, quietly, completely mine again in every way that mattered. The door of my home stayed wide open for anyone who arrived with love, and it stayed firmly locked against anyone who believed that family was a weapon to be used. Growing older does not mean growing smaller. Sometimes it means finally understanding exactly how much space you deserve and refusing with great clarity and great peace to surrender a single inch of it. And to you listening to my story, remember this: your home is more than four walls. It's the space where you decide what you will and won't accept. Looking back, I wish I had set clearer boundaries from the very first night. Family drama often starts small, a laminated sheet of rules, a thrown-away bread maker. But it escalates when love is confused with acceptance. Don't make my mistake of letting guilt cloud my judgment, because he was my son. Teaching for 32 years taught me that boundaries protect relationships, not damage them. These revenge stories with mom and family drama teach us that documentation protects truth. When someone tries to rewrite your story, evidence speaks louder than accusations. I believe God gave me those teaching years for a reason. Systematically documenting bad behavior saved my home. But real revenge isn't destruction. It's about protecting what matters while leaving the door open for redemption. My grandchildren riding 4 miles to my door proved that love finds its way back when you choose wisdom over vengeance. If revenge stories with mom and family drama like this resonate with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Have you ever had to stand your ground? Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you'd like more stories like this one, please subscribe to Silent Revenge with Auntie May. Your comments help others who are walking this path. Thank you for staying until the very end. Some details in this story have been adapted for reflection and learning. What matters most is the message about boundaries, dignity, and choosing wisdom over revenge.